Last week, we talked about, among other things, formal logic and informal logic. This man was a professor of philosophy at Oxford. His name is Stephen Toulmin. And he noticed something. He noticed back in the 1950s that college professors and other researchers who paid any attention at all to logic and to arguments, they only paid attention to mathematical and symbolic logic and formal logic. They did not have a vocabulary or a way to talk about informal logic. So in 1958, he wrote a book entitled The Uses of Argument. And he developed a model for the kinds of arguments that people make when they are having real arguments outside a classroom. Just to remind you what we said last week, informal logic, the arguments are not true or false. They don't prove or disprove. They are stronger or they are weaker. People will commonly say to each other, "Your argument is strong, but not strong enough to convince me." With formal logic, that would make no sense. The argument is true or it's not true. But when people argue, sometimes they are persuaded, sometimes they are not. The other difference, major difference, with formal logic, it doesn't matter the culture, the group, the age of the arguers. If it's true, it's true. 2 plus 2 is 4, no matter what country you're from, no matter what group you belong to. But arguments persuade people more or less depending on a lot of things. Culture, age. Have you ever noticed your parents have what they think is very good advice for you, and to you, it makes no sense? They're making arguments. Just about any advice is in the form of an argument. And when the advice is not good in your estimation, that's because it's informal logic. Might have some strength to it, but not enough to convince you. Today, we are going to spend our time on Toulmin's model of arguments in informal logic. There are 6 parts. 3 of them are the basic parts that are present in every argument. If those 3 are not all 3 present, what you have is not a complete argument. The other 3, they are often worth considering, but not always. Here's the first. An argument in Toulmin's model begins with a claim. Now, to define a claim for Toulmin's model, if the argument is effective, what is it that you want people hearing it to believe? What change in belief are you trying to give people? Sum that up in one sentence, and that will be the argument's claim. Now, sometimes an arguer will set out to make an argument, to persuade an audience, but be so unclear about the claim that people listening might say, "What is it that you're saying? What exactly are you trying to say?" Let me demonstrate what an argument might sound like with a poorly defined claim. I'm going to make this argument to Benzinger-san. Did you know that your cerebrospinal fluid rinses out beta amyloid plaque every time there's a slow wave? And did you know dysregulated circadian rhythm increases your production of ghrelin and decreases your production of leptin? So you know what I'm saying you should do, right? Okay, that's an argument that had no claim. Now let me put a claim in front of it. It will still be a weak argument because there's one other part to add later, but at least you'll know what I'm saying. You need to get 8 hours of sleep a night. Your brain rinses out beta amyloid plaque every time there's a slow wave. And if your circadian rhythm is dysregulated, you increase production of ghrelin and decrease production of leptin. Now, it's still not a good argument, but it's not just a confused mess anymore. So when you hear someone say a bunch of things, and they obviously think they should change your mind, but you don't know what they're trying to say, you don't know what their claim is. The argument has to begin with a claim. A couple of guidelines for a good claim. Generally, you want your claim to be short, but reasonably precise. It's difficult to do both. If you want to make your claim precise, it can tend to get longer. But if it's longer, people may have difficulty remembering it. And people who are learning how to argue sometimes make the mistake that they'll put the whole long explanation into the claim. My example just now was, you should get 8 hours of sleep. That's a pretty short claim. But here, the guidance I'm giving you is more precise claims are actually a little bit better. Because I teach communication, I am often in conversations about how people spend too much time on their phones. You may have had family members, other old people who said, you should be staring at your phone less. That's not a very good claim, because not all time on the phone is equal. Some things you do on the phone are important. Some are necessary. Some are a bad idea. The guidance I give people about their phone, it may not be perfect, but it's more precise than spend less time on the phone. Here is my claim. My claim is always, you should treat your phone the way a carpenter treats a hammer. It's a tool. Take it out when you need it. When you are done with it, put it away. A carpenter does not walk around all day fondling their hammer, staring lovingly at their hammer. They use it when they need it. And when they don't need it, they put it away. One other example I can give you. There's a researcher at the University of Chicago. He has been demonstrating for about 12 years that in the United States, at any rate, when people walk up to strangers that they have never met before and just talk to them, make a conversation with them, both of them enjoy it. They predict that they're not going to. They say, that's scary, I don't want to do that, the other person won't like me. But this researcher, his name is Nick Epley, he has demonstrated experimentally over and over again. If you do it, talk to someone you've never met and just make a conversation. They will enjoy it and you will enjoy it. Now I say that to give you a good example of a bad claim. There was an essay published about this 2 days ago, and I had to use it for this class. There was a psychologist who went to a conference and heard about this research. So he started walking up to strangers and starting conversations with them. And multiple times, what he walked up to were groups of friends who were out to spend time together and had limited time together, had not seen each other in a long time, and they felt responsible. They felt a burden to be nice to him, and they missed out on time with each other. So the claim, you should talk to strangers, is too broad. This psychologist, in his essay, he said, Epley is right, but you can't say it too broadly. Instead, you should say, you should talk to strangers when both you and the other stranger have no other friends around and nothing important to do. Things like on the train, maybe, or standing in line, which is where Epley did his experiments anyway. So, a focused claim is better than a very broad claim. So the second element of Toulmin's model, the grounds. The grounds. You will sometimes see this word used interchangeably, the data. The grounds or the data. There's no real difference when you're talking about the Toulmin model. I'm used to using grounds, so I'm going to stick with that. One thing we can, well, let me define it first. Grounds refers to the part of the argument that the listener can observe for themselves or that they have experienced before. I might argue, you don't really need an umbrella today because it's sunny outside. You don't need an umbrella is the claim. It's sunny outside is the grounds. You can confirm that for yourself. There's a window right there. I might also say, at the end of today, you can start submitting arguments for the debate assignment. And it would be wise to start submitting them soon, because the further into the semester we get, the busier you're going to get. Now, those grounds, I can't point to them like I can the window, but you, in your own memory, have experienced as you get further into the term, you will get busier. So those work as grounds because you're not depending on me. You are supplying that evidence yourself from your own memory. Sometimes people will make a claim and not supply grounds for it. That, when we are evaluating arguments, we call that an unsupported assertion. And unsupported assertions are bad arguments. So some kind of grounds, having some kind of grounds, is rather important. Let me give you one example. In the United States, the college I teach at has a street running through the middle of it. Half the buildings are on one side of the street, half on the other, and it's a big street, and it's busy. It's a 5-lane street. And students often need to get from one building to another, and they are in a hurry, and some of them are very immature and impatient. They will step right out into the street with cars coming. They will weave in between the cars, and when I see them do that, I say, you shouldn't do that. That's dangerous. Now, that's a claim. You shouldn't do that. That's dangerous is not very impressive as grounds. So when I say that, they ignore me. What I have said before, the college I teach at is a tiny, tiny liberal arts Christian college. But right across the street is the University of Oregon, which has, I think they're up to 30,000 students. And they have students from all over the world. So I tell our students, a lot of the people driving on this street are international students. They are from everywhere in the world where the traffic laws are different. They are very unpredictable. That's why it's dangerous to step out into this street. Now, those are grounds. They can check that independently for themselves, but they are not even impressed by that. Let me tell you what happened about 3 years ago that finally got some students to listen to me about being careful with that street. The city commissioned a report. What are the dangerous streets in the city? And they defined dangerous as the streets where there have been the most accidents, where someone on foot, not in a car, was hurt or killed. And they ranked the dangerous streets in the city. And that street that goes through our campus was number 1. I took that. It was in the newspaper. I cut the article out. I highlighted over the headline. It listed the streets. I highlighted that 11th Street was number 1. I stuck that on the bulletin board. And I began telling students, that is the deadliest street in this city. More people are killed because they are hit by cars on that street than any street in the city. You shouldn't step out into it. That's the deadliest street in the city. Those were some grounds. And they could check it independent of me. It was a government report. It was published. Last thing, my example with Benzinger-san a minute ago, I started off giving grounds. I said, your brain rinses out beta amyloid plaque with a slow wave. That is based on the research of Marta Nadergaard at the University of Rochester. And then I said, a dysregulated circadian rhythm increases ghrelin, drives down leptin. That's been experimentally proven a bunch of times. You can find the studies in scientific journals. It's not me asserting something, published science. It's still not a good argument because it's missing the third part of the Toulmin model, the warrant. Here's what the warrant is. The warrant is a brief explanation of why the grounds support the claim. A brief explanation of why the grounds support the claim. Let me now make my argument one more time, but this time, claim, grounds, and warrants. You should get 8 hours of sleep a night because your brain rinses out beta amyloid plaque every time you have a slow wave. Slow waves are associated with dreaming REM cycles. Beta amyloid plaque is our best explanation for what causes Alzheimer's disease. One of the major risk factors for Alzheimer's disease is interrupted sleep. Second argument, you should get at least 8 hours of sleep a night because a dysregulated circadian rhythm increases production of ghrelin and decreases production of leptin. Ghrelin is a hormone that makes you feel hungry. It triggers the sensation of hunger. Leptin is the hormone that triggers the sensation of being full, which is why people who are severely sleep deprived gain a lot of weight because they eat and eat and eat. They're always hungry and they never feel full. Now, the first time I made that terrible argument to you, I just gave you grounds with no claim. The second time I made the claim, I gave the grounds. You knew it was about sleep, but it probably didn't make sense. When you fill in the warrant, you explain why do the grounds support the claim. I mentioned that the University of Oregon has 30,000 students. The college I teach at has fewer than 1,000. When we recruit students, we often say, you should come to Bushnell University because our faculty to student ratio is 13-1, and more than 3/4 of our classes have fewer than 20 students. Claim you should come to Bushnell University. All those numbers, grounds. But what about the warrant? Why does a faculty to student ratio and the size of the classes mean that I should go to that college? The warrant would be smaller classes are a better learning environment. While we have, right now, the basic parts of the Toulmin model, if you have a claim, grounds, and a warrant, then you have a complete argument. Let me time out here just for a moment and tell you about research done by Kyoku Oi at Toyo Eiwa University in Yokohama. She's published on this a number of times over the years. She gives prompts to American college students and to Japanese college students to produce arguments. And what they do, Japanese college students make the claim a lot more indirectly. So instead of, you should get 8 hours of sleep a night, it might be phrased something like, it's important to rest enough, which is not as direct. It gets at the same idea, but it doesn't focus. And she said, commonly, Japanese arguers may leave out the grounds and the warrant, trusting that the listener or the reader will fill them in. There's a longer conversation to be had about that. We might have it at a later class meeting. The other 3 parts of Toulmin's model. There is the backing. The backing is a pretty simple idea. Sometimes the warrant itself seems open to question. Most of the time, when arguments are attacked by arguers, sometimes it might be the claim is exaggerated. We'll talk about that in a moment. Sometimes it might be the grounds are out of date or they were improperly collected, but the warrant is the part most commonly attacked. Backing is supporting the warrant. You heard me just a few minutes ago say that a smaller class is a better learning environment. Well, not everybody thinks that's true. There's an author who was very popular for a number of years. Now I think he's more of a podcaster. His name is Malcolm Gladwell. He doesn't think smaller classes are better learning environments at all. And he has a number of arguments about why that's wrong. I might say, to provide backing for my warrant, I might say, if a class is smaller, you have more opportunities to participate. If this were a huge 600-person class in a lecture hall, we couldn't play the game we start class with. I could say it's easier for the instructor to know students and not forget your names when the class is smaller. All of those would be backing for the warrant that a smaller class is a better learning environment. And if you're thinking about it, the warrant explains why the grounds support the claim, but then the backing, that's kind of treating this like a claim and supplying grounds for it. And so it might need its own warrant. And if you thought about that, you're right. This could become its own separate argument. And then the explanation for why this backing supported this might have its own warrant, and it might be challenged. And those challenges can go on and on and on. That's what sometimes happens as an argument unfolds. 5th part of Toulmin's model is the qualifier. The qualifier is language that is included in the claim that admits that the claim is not always true. Language included in the claim that admits that the claim is not always true. New debaters are sometimes surprised to hear that adding a qualifier to your claim makes your argument stronger. Because new debaters think, well, the more sweeping and big and broad I make my argument, the stronger it is. No, actually, the dumber it is and the easier it is to beat. What if I were to say, Japanese people have good manners? All Japanese people? Everywhere? Always? What if I say, most Japanese people who are having a reasonably good day have good manners? That's a stronger argument. You put in the qualifier, it makes more sense. I might say, being bald is better than having hair. And you might all gang up on me and say that's wrong. But what if I say, being bald is better than having hair for some people. Harder arguments for you to get at. I might say, you should carry an umbrella. And you might say, but I look stupid when I do this. And I might say, you should carry an umbrella when you're outside. That takes the arguments that you don't want it inside away. The sixth and final part of the Toulmin model. I don't know why I'm doing this while trying to talk. All right, sixth and finally, the rebuttal. The rebuttal, that is language that concedes that there are exceptions. Language that concedes that there are exceptions. So I might say, being bald is better for some people unless you are a shampoo model. You should carry an umbrella when you're outside unless you need both hands free to carry something else. These three, they are the basic Toulmin model. If they all are included, it's a complete argument. The other three, backing, qualifier, and rebuttal, when you have to discuss and develop an argument, if the warrant is challenged, it may need backing. Certain claims need qualifiers, and certain claims need rebuttals, and they both tend to make the argument stronger by making it more precise. A couple of more things, and then we are going to practice what we have learned. Stephen Toulmin said, arguments are made differently according to the field. And he talked a lot about argument fields. And I actually have published some research in argumentation about argument fields and how they work. And I went looking. He originally borrowed the term from the idea of an academic field. So English, math, biology, sociology. And that, in Japanese, unless I'm wrong, is gakujutsu bunya. So I think we could reasonably translate field into Japanese as bunya. That's my guess. Here's the point that Toulmin was making in talking about fields. A scientist argues differently from an English professor who argues differently from a business professor. An English professor might make claims like, this poem is beautiful. A scientist is not likely to say, my data about blood diffusion through membranes is beautiful. They might say it having a chat with a friend, but they wouldn't publish that in a journal. A business professor is not likely to say the business plan is beautiful. The scientist, as grounds, is going to offer experimental results, a method used in that field and demonstrated and confirmed. An English professor is going to take excerpts from the poem or the play or the novel. A business professor probably will look at things like how much money, what kinds of profits, what kinds of measurable increases in efficiency has a business had. And as far as warrants, it may be statistical data, it may be references to history, it may be just giving your examples and trusting the reader will agree. They reason differently depending on what field they are in. And remember, the important thing about this detail, formal logic, it doesn't change. It doesn't matter who reads the argument. Formal logic is universal. Informal logic, it depends a lot on who the arguers are. I see a hand.
Just for self-reference, could I see what was the two words in front of
Oh, yeah, definitely. Let me pull that back up. No, that. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. You're welcome. All right. So now, one last example to try to pull the whole model together. Toulmin first came up with the model in watching and thinking about a criminal trial. So, let us assume that a car was stolen. Let us assume that, let's see, who shall I pick on? Let's say that, Shimizu-san, your car was stolen. And so, what we know, the car is missing. An eyewitness who saw the car being driven away said someone who was about 1.8 meters tall, looked to be in their 40s, and was wearing a blue jacket, was driving the car. And Toulmin took the evidence, and he named that the grounds. So, then let's say Bob is arrested because Bob was in that neighborhood. He's in his 40s. He's 1.8 meters tall. He has a blue jacket that his friends say he was wearing that day. And when asked where was he at the time the car was stolen, he can't prove where he was. So they say, they charge him, they indict him. You are accused of stealing the car. You are indicted for grand theft auto. That's the claim. You stole the car. The grounds are, here's all this evidence, the eyewitness testimony. The warrant, I actually gave away the warrant. The evidence was the eyewitness testimony. The warrant is the part where Bob meets all of it. You stole the car. Here's the evidence. The evidence points to you. That is what Toulmin took and derived his model. Now, the backing might refer to arguments about whether this evidence actually points to Bob in the first place. So, an attorney might say that the eyewitness was unreliable. The attorney might say, blue is not specific enough. My client has a dark blue jacket. The eyewitness said it was light blue. Arguing over the warrant might require the prosecution to further defend the warrant by producing more backing. As far as the qualifier, when you charge someone with a crime, you often have to be more specific. If you charge someone with murder, first degree, second degree, aggravated, manslaughter. And then finally, the rebuttal. The closest example really to a rebuttal would be plea bargaining. You are guilty of grand theft auto unless you'll agree to plead guilty, in which case we will charge you with criminal mischief. That was the inspiration for the Toulmin model. But he only used that as a starting point. He then said, and other people have agreed, these are the building blocks, the basic units of how people argue other than academics. So now, years ago, I had a colleague suggest to me an exercise that I thought was actually pretty brilliant. The Toulmin model works best when you apply it over and over again so many times that you don't have to think about it anymore. Does anybody in here like stand-up comedy? Like a really, really good comedian? Okay? Several people. This colleague of mine said, stand-up comics make arguments. And if you go home and listen to your favorite stand-up comic and just practice, spot the claim, spot the grounds, spot the warrant. Do it over and over again. You start hearing claims, grounds, and warrants in everyday conversation. So, I have 3 excerpts here. You never know if humor will translate. Probably not. And they're not the funniest jokes the comedians have ever come up with because I needed to pick things that were fairly clean. But here's one from Louis C.K. For this one, I'm just going to let you read it, and then I'll mark where I think it is, where the parts are, I think. Okay. This one I'm going to give you where I think you can find the parts of the model. I would call this the claim. Being human is a massive upgrade. If you accept his joke, that's what he wants you to walk away with. Being human is a massive upgrade. That makes that the claim. Now, the grounds are the part you can either see for yourself or recover from your own memory. I would say that. Whoa, I just gave you the whole thing. For every other living thing, life ends by being eaten. Now, he's exaggerating. Other life forms sometimes die of old age, and humans are sometimes eaten. But then finally, the warrant would explain why those grounds support that claim, which I think is this. Being human is a massive upgrade. Other life forms usually die when they are eaten. We're out of the food chain. We get to die old in a bed. That's why being human is a massive upgrade. That's how I would break that down and analyze it using the Toulmin model. Now let me give you a second one, and I want to see if you can spot the claim and then the grounds and then the warrant. Out of what's written there, when he's done with that bit, what does he want you to believe? What thing that he said does he want you to believe? What do you think? What do you think? I think that's the claim. Now, what do you think the grounds are? What's the thing that they can retrieve from their own memory or they can see for themselves? What do you think?
Like driving on the highway to Spike.
Yeah, those are the grounds. What would the warrant be? If all he said was, we all experienced Schadenfreude, and then he said that, and that's it, what would be missing from the explanation? I made the right choice in life? If he'd never heard the word Schadenfreude, would hearing about that experience, make you say, ah, yes? What do you think?
Why he wondered they would never translate into another language.
See, okay, it's possible we can disagree on this. I think that's the warrant. So, you're driving on the highway, you see the other side's backed up. This is what the word Schadenfreude means. We all experience Schadenfreude. This is what I want you to believe. This is what you've recovered. This is what Schadenfreude means. There's one more, and then I will send you off to watch your favorite stand-up comic and see if you can spot arguments there. at the end of that bit, what, from what she said, does she want you to believe? What do you think?
No, you don't remember your plan.
Look at this. Whoops. Dang it. I miss my 20s. No, you don't. Yeah, you don't really miss your 20s. Now, it may be harder to find, but which part in there do you think is what she can pull out of the audience's observation or memory? I had to read this 2 or 3 times to decide what I thought the grounds were. See, but then she goes on to say because. And I think that may fall into the warrant, maybe. Maybe. We'll see. What do you think?
I think the ground
Yeah.
is you don't have a gut to listen to it.
Close to it. No intuition, no instincts. You can't make decisions, only mistakes. And then right after, she says you don't have a gut to listen to. I think she says you don't miss your 20s, and she trusts they will remember these things, and then she can interpret that and say, the reason you think you miss your 20s, that's why I think this falls in the warrant. Yeah. All right. What we are going to do, in lieu of doing the question box, we are going to do a little more practice with the Toulmin model. Now we have 16 people here. Nakauchi-san is not here. Nguyen-san is not here. That means Mizuno-san and Shimizu-san are going to be partners. And then 4 and 5, 6 and 7,